Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's CEO's Conversation. I'd like to give a special word of welcome to our sponsors, Standard Bank executives and managers, all CEOs joining us here tonight, all BMF corporate members and their representatives, BMF board members, esteemed guests with us tonight. I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to a robust, enriching, insightful, and compassionate conversation as we grapple with how this global pandemic has affected each industry and humanity at large. My name is Esethu Mangcwatshwa. I'm a chartered accountant by profession, and I work for the Land Bank, and I proudly serve on the board of the Black Management Forum. For those of you who've been keeping a close eye on the news, yes, I do still have a job at the Land Bank. And we are working very hard to stabilize the bank because it plays a really important role in South Africa's agricultural sector and by extension to food security in the country. So I myself will be listening very intently as Mitch talks about his own strategy for turning around Massmart, and I will be unashamedly stealing some of those pearls of wisdom to apply at the bank. Our guest of honor for tonight is none other than Mitch Slape, the CEO of Massmart in South Africa. And we are truly honored to have a global leader such as Mitch join us tonight. The topic for tonight's conversation is forging a new retail economy post a global crisis. What we are hoping Mitch will touch on includes some insights on leadership, on leading during times of crisis, and how he personally has adapted during this time, how the business he leads has adapted, and most importantly, how people have been affected. By people, I'm referring to employees, the communities in which they operate, but also Massmart customers, suppliers, investors, and all stakeholders. The timing of this conversation is all the more important as we get news this morning that South African retailer Edcon has filed for voluntary business rescue. This is not entirely because of COVID-19 or the lockdown, but the lockdown and the seizure of retail activity has really just burnt through Edcon's cash reserves. And I think, Mitch, you can possibly just weigh in on this as well. Before Mitch comes in and gives us his comments, I think I need to just introduce him with his illustrious career. Mitch Slape joined Massmart in September 2019 as CEO. He has been with Walmart since 1995 and has held several important leadership positions, including global roles in Argentina, Korea, Mexico, and Japan. Mitch, I hope you will also just let us know how your experience in all of these countries has compared to South Africa and what lessons maybe you learned there and the similarities you see in a South African context. In these roles, Mitch has led all merger and acquisition activity for Walmart International and has earned quite a reputation for being a fixer. So Mitch, can you also tell us that? Did you get to South Africa and phone Walmart and tell them it's handled? Mitch joined Walmart Japan in 2015 as Chief Operating Officer, responsible for store operations, e-commerce, marketing, and format strategy segments of the Japan business. Mitch is fluent in Spanish and will be soon fluent in isiZulu, I hope. He received his Master's of International Finance from Thunderbird School of Global Management and his bachelor's degree in finance from Waikato State University. Mitch, could you please just give us insights into, from the time you arrived in September 2019, I know retrenchments were announced in January, and we all know how South African unions love to talk about retrenchments. The strategy that you've put in place for Massmart, how it translates into the bigger Walmart group, and how COVID really, and that's really the topic for today, but COVID obviously falls into a bigger context. How COVID has really impacted your business, how you've had to pivot or change strategies or adapt, and how you see the industry going forward, both in a South African and also in a global context. So with that, Mitch, I think I'll open the floor to you.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, SA2, for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. And before I get started, I want to thank the Black Management Forum for inviting me to come and share some comments this evening. It's always a privilege to be able to talk about our business and to talk about what we're up to and what we're doing. And in particular, we are in an incredibly interesting time in terms of just business overall and how to manage through that. So it literally is unprecedented what we're going through. So we'll talk a little bit at least about how Massmart is managing through that. And I look forward to engaging in that dialogue with you. I really do look forward to when we can do these events together in person at some point in the future. It would be great to be able to interact with all of you personally. I'm really hungry, as I'm sure all of us are, for just human contact right now, being sort of locked away a little bit and doing the remote work thing. Before I get started into just talking about Massmart and strategy, maybe just a little bit of my personal journey and how I got into this sort of unusual career, really. I grew up in the middle of the United States in Kansas, in kind of a rural area. In fact, I don't know how many know Kansas, but it's more cows than people, I think, and a lot of wheat. So it's a very agricultural place. But what changed my life was when I was in high school, I got to go be a foreign exchange student and live in Japan. And it was the first time I'd ever traveled before, first time I'd ever had that experience. And that's really what got me on the path to wanting to live and work internationally. And what I've discovered is I came to work with Walmart was really much of the journey has just been raising my hand and saying, I want to go do that. I think that there's something there that I can offer a value. There's things that I want to learn as well. And that's one thing's led to another. And, many years down the road with Walmart, I'm just finishing up 25 years with the company. I've been an expatriate now, I think, in 6 different markets around the world. Each one is unique and different. It's hard to compare them, but I'm happy to talk a little bit about lessons learned and how I apply them to South Africa for sure. I know that we're in the middle of a unique and unprecedented time, and there is a tendency to go right into that. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about strategy at Massmart, because I think the one important thing that I've learned over the years is that I think good strategy endures, and good strategy is built with the idea that you're informed by the external context. And you certainly react in different ways to what that external context gives you. But I think if you've got sound strategy, it endures through those types of events. And certainly that's what we're finding with this COVID crisis that we're in. But I'd like to take a moment just to kind of talk a little bit about what I found when I first got here and why I believe very much in Massmart and our turnaround story. When I first arrived, I started a process of just really digging into the details of the business, trying to understand everything that I could about it. One of the things that I did was I sat down and met with our top 150 leaders in the business, just to get to know them personally, but also hear what their thoughts and ideas were about how we improved the company. Obviously went around and toured a lot of stores, got a feeling for what was going on, and I would call it just the listening and learning portion. And one of the things I've learned about coming to different countries and working is that you do have to be, I think, quite humble about things, in the sense that though I may understand retail or I may understand finance and business, I don't understand, and nor will I ever fully understand, in the same depth as a native South African, all of the issues, history, complexities of the country. And so it's so important that you rely on people around you to help as much as they can to teach you and learn from that. And ask forgiveness a lot because you get things wrong just because you have a tendency to see things through the lens of your experience. And so I think that's an important lesson for me. But what I saw with Massmart specifically was it was a company that had a portfolio of really strong brands that customers loved. Even our brands that have been challenged historically have tremendous customer following. So I knew that there was something that we really needed to build on with that. Secondly, I saw that we had high market share in many categories throughout the business, and that we were named consistently as the destination for those categories. So again, something very good to build on. We had a lot of procurement scale, both through what we get on our own at Massmart, as well as leveraging what the potential for Walmart was. But then also, importantly, there's a lot of unexploited value in the company and an opportunity to make the company more valuable if we pulled some levers. So seeing all of these things and learning from the team, what I began to do was begin to build some hypotheses about some basic things that we needed to do together, and tried to really be crystal clear and simple in my messaging about how I wanted the business to begin to behave as we continue to go through our due diligence of learning about the business. And so what I asked the business to do early on was, number one, embrace the idea of collaboration. Understand that we working together are unbeatable. Now, it seems really simple, but this was an important concept for Massmart because we had for many years been a business that operated in a federated model. Each of our businesses operated very independently, and we didn't work together well. So the idea that we would put Massmart first as opposed to our brands first was as a different concept, and one that we really needed to reinforce with the team. But what we really found was that it was something that the leaders of the business wanted. It was something that the top 150 wanted, and really began to embrace it very aggressively. The second thing we talked about was that we've got to be powered by Walmart. And what that means for us is that even though we are a South African company, we're focused on our business here in South Africa, we're also part of this very successful international global retailer. And there's so many opportunities for us to learn and to leverage that learning into what we do here. And the way I explained it to the team was, think about it. What company in the world wouldn't want to have at your fingertips the ability to access the best programs, the best thinking around the job that you do, resources, and all of that was very much available for us. So we started talking about all of the things that we could do to pull the best of Walmart into our business. To get that program kickstarted, I brought my entire executive committee to the United States to spend a full week just getting a download of what Walmart was working on and what were the things that we could bring into the company. And then as time progressed, we really started focusing in on how do we move the needle from an expense standpoint. This was important because we were spending way more money than we should, and we were not leveraging expenses and things like that. So we launched this idea of every rand matters as a way of all of our people in the business thinking about what they could do to do things in a more efficient way, to not waste money. And this concept is important in our business, and it became even more important as time has gone by, and especially now in this environment with COVID. So those were sort of the early interventions. While we were doing these early interventions, we were also working as a leadership team to begin to think through strategy. And the strategy that we outlined, I wouldn't really call it in my mind, a fully developed strategy. I would call it effectively a turnaround plan or a turnaround strategy. And that's important because we wanted to really tackle those things that would quickly change the trajectory of the business, not wait for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years for things to happen, but to do things that were quick interventions that would move the needle now. So the 6 pillars of our strategy were, first of all, we wanted to reset the group operating model. That meant moving away from the federated model that we previously had to a model where we were more of an integrated company working together. And I'll talk about that more in just a moment. Secondly, we wanted to look at portfolio optimization. As we looked across our stores, and this is true in all retailers, we saw that some of our stores performed very well, and some of them really were performing very poorly, and we needed to make some hard decisions. And you've seen some of those as time goes by with the announcement of the Dion Wired closure, and then also the prospective closure of some of our mass cash stores as well. But that was part of that process. Thirdly, we wanted to reset the game business and refocus it. That while it was a great brand, had a great history, it had really lost relevancy with customers. And we're in that process today. Fourthly, we needed to change the way that we were serving the wholesale market. We had a little bit of wholesale service in macro. We have a little bit of wholesale service in our mass cash and carry business, but we were competing with one another, and we weren't leveraging the best of everything we do in wholesale in order to serve our customers. Fifth, we wanted to focus on supply chain integration. Massmart over the years had developed a supply chain that was effectively siloed. Every part of the business had developed its own supply chain infrastructure. And so we're on a journey now to take all of that and bring it together into one entity. And what that means for us is basically getting all of our data together in a way that we can see product across the business in a unified way. Today in Massmart, if I sell a bottle of water and I sell it in 4 different businesses, we look at that bottle of water as a different unit. And so I run it through my distribution center 4 different times, and I don't have the ability to pull from different places. So it starts with data, and then it starts with a consolidation of our overall distribution. And then finally, we wanted to reset the cost structure of the business. And this was a recognition that we had allowed over the years for costs to creep up. And our expenses were growing faster than our sales, and that situation needed to stop. And so we began with this theme of Every Rand Matters, and that's evolved into more formal programs, which I'll also talk about in just a moment. So let me take on each of these and just give you a little bit of a sense of what we've done so far. On portfolio optimization, what we've done is we've created 2 business units as opposed to different businesses that were individual and siloed. So we've got a retail business unit and a wholesale. And then all of the support structures, finance, human resources, supply chain, IT, are centralizing now to supply services across the totality of the group. We've taken 2 of our very strongest retailers and put them into lead positions in those businesses. And then we're finding commonality between the retail businesses and the way that we service those, as well as bringing our wholesale business together so that we can serve our customers more effectively there. We began moving in that direction on February 1, and we continue to revise and refine each of those different structures within that business. Secondly, on portfolio optimization, I've mentioned before we made the decision relative to Dion Wired. We completed that actually right before the lockdown began and went ahead and closed those stores. We still have not closed the Mass Cash stores. That should happen soon after the lockdown is over. But what we do in our business is we go through a process every 6 months where we look at every store in our portfolio and we make a determination about whether or not that store is going to be successful over the long run. And so we do a lot of modeling and things like that. Obviously, we try to fix every store that we can, but what tends to happen to retailers over time is that they hold on to things that fundamentally aren't working for too long a period of time. And they instead of making hard decisions, and unfortunately in business, you do have to make hard decisions from time to time. Even Walmart in the United States, which is an incredibly successful retailer, from time to time will make a decision to close a store because a market has moved on, dynamics have changed, and the business needs to keep pace with that. So that was really the focus there. We made a decision to close 34 stores in total, and we're progressing on with that with pace. So let me shift over to the game reset. So what we're doing with game is we're fundamentally modifying the customer value proposition. Our research told us that game was a great business. If you rewind the clock probably 20 years ago or so into the early 2000s, when I was first coming to South Africa and just talking with Uber drivers or with people I would meet, I would ask them about game. And they would say, yeah, it's a great place. I used to shop there all the time. But over the years, it's become less interesting. And so one of the things we're trying to do is to figure out how do we get back to that place. So before we go there, one of the things that I was asking, well, what happened exactly? How did we lose our way? And it sounds to me as if it was a combination of things, but we had many different leaders over a period of time, each one with their own strategies, which tends to happen. We had many different merchandise directors over the years, again, with their own strategies and ideas. And so we were losing consistency. We weren't executing consistently over time in a good way. So what we've done is we've put in a leader in merchandising that was present when game was very successful back in the early 2000s. He was the merchandise leader then. He's come back and he's taken that position over again. And so we're beginning to reconstruct what that looks like. We're using the Mall of Africa as kind of a test store and beginning to make some changes there, but we've communicated that we're taking out all of fresh and frozen, or we're replacing it with basic apparel, and then we're going category by category and we're modifying the assortments. Some expanding, some contracting, but all trying to come up with a clear, more compelling customer value proposition. It's going to take us time to get there, but we're committed to making game work. And I'm often asked, why don't you just go ahead and throw in the towel and close game? And in reality, game has got, in my mind, so much to offer. It's embraced by customers. It's recognized as a brand that people want and would like to see be successful. So I think we have an opportunity, if we can get the proposition right, get pricing right, get service right, to reinvigorate the brand. And my view is it's much harder to build a brand than to take a brand that is already strong and make the necessary adjustments. And we're committed to the long term. We're committed to making it work, and that's what we're focused on. So let me shift over to wholesale route to market. What I'm interested in there is the merger of these businesses, and that's literally what we're doing, is merging Mass Cash Wholesale and Macro together so that we create effectively about a 50 billion Rand wholesale business. It would be the largest wholesale business in the country, and I believe in the continent. The opportunity that we have is to very quickly begin to leverage that scale for the benefit of our wholesale customers, our B2B, our business-to-business customers. And those are the details that we're working through right now. We're already seeing early wins, and they're primarily happening on the merchandising space, where when we look at the merchandising assortment of those businesses, they overlap to the tune of about 60 to 70%. So the opportunity for us to buy as a unified group is tremendously powerful and should yield a lot of upside. On supply chain optimization, I've already spoken just a bit about it, but the one thing I didn't mention is that as we go through this process, we're also beginning to consolidate our distribution centers. So moving from 15 distribution centers across the country, by the time that we reach 2023, we'll be down to 7. And all of those 7 will be serving all of our formats, so trying to do it in a very focused way. Finally, on cost reset, the knock-on to Every Rand Matters, to being focused on expenses, has been an important one for us. So, last year we grew expenses just above 10% on sales that were much lower in growth than that. As we began this program, what we saw was a real change in psychology in the business. So the third quarter, we saw expenses go down. Fourth quarter, expense growth was only 4.5%. And by the time we got to the first quarter of this year, we actually saw expense growth decline to a rate that was lower than our sales growth. So that's the sweet spot for a retailer, is when you can begin to leverage expenses overall. Now, the beauty of all of this has been that this has been on really changing behavior. What we have now working is a formal program we call Smart Spend in the business, where we've asked many of our top young leaders to take on a whole line of the P&L across the totality of the business and develop strategies to help us to reduce that expense. And they work together in teams. It's a very formal process. But we've identified another R1.5 billion that we'll wind up taking out of our cost structure over the next couple of years. And I would fully expect, as this year progresses, we'll see negative expense growth in Massmart as we continue to get the cost base reset. So the reason I go over all those details on the turnaround plan is that turnaround plan is the one that we're moving forward with. And so I guess the question is, well, does COVID-19 change any of that? And the answer is no. The answer is that, if anything, it accelerates the speed at which we move through that strategy. One of the things that we did to launch our thinking around the strategy was we hosted an investor strategy day at the end of January to explain all of the dynamics of this. And we committed that we would come back at the mid-year with more information on the turnaround plan. And I would imagine, as we think about that mid-year update, a lot of it is going to be very much a focus of how do we accelerate now that we know that the retail landscape is changing, thanks in large part to this crisis that we're going through. So let me shift gears and talk a little bit about what's happened since COVID. What we've seen, and let me talk as Walmart for a moment. This is unique in the sense that every part of the world is going through the same thing. And the countries where Walmart has a presence are all going through it at different stages. And we've got the benefit of seeing how has China responded to it, what's happening in Argentina, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in the US, and we're taking those learnings into how we respond here. So with the lockdown here in South Africa specifically, what's happened to our business is that, and you probably know this, our builders business has essentially been closed. We still can supply some essential service providers. Secondly, we've been substantially limited in our game and our macro business in what we can sell. We can only focus on essential products. So most of our general merchandise product is limited at this stage in the game. Liquor, of course, is limited, which is a significant part of both of those businesses. And then in our mass cash wholesale and in our Cambridge business, which is sort of a supermarket retail, can broadly trade with the exception of a few GM categories, general merchandise categories, and of course alcohol. So that's sort of the state of play where we are right now, and it is a limiting factor for our business. Our business is trading, at a substantial sales reduction from what it was a year ago. Part of the process for us has been actively lobbying and working with government to try to make sure that we open and move forward in a safe and responsible way. So as we speak today, what do we know? We know that there's going to be a gradual opening of business activity starting this Friday. As I speak to you, I'm not fully aware of what all the regulations will be. We're still waiting for the gazetted regulations from some of the ministries to understand what we can sell and how we can work. We know that on a personal basis, we'll be able to move around a bit more, perhaps, but I suspect that we're still going to be largely working from home, and that's going to be a reality for us. And so, given these realities, how are we thinking about priorities? And essentially, as we think about the lockdown and we think about moving through COVID, and we started this from the outset of this crisis, we developed 5 priorities that we said this is the way we're going to respond. So priority number 1 for us was, how do we best support our employees and what we call them associates in our business? How do we best support our associates through this time period? And this is important to me because I really believe this is fundamentally going to be part of the license to reopen business. But it's, how do you create a safe and healthy and responsible work environment to make sure that our people are protected? And so what we've been really focusing in on is how do we set the industry standard in terms of personal protective equipment? How do we make sure that we are setting up all of the right communications in terms of social distancing? How do we make sure that we're sanitizing properly throughout the store, that we've got good protocols in place in the event that we do have an infection? So all of those things we've developed and are continuing to emphasize, work through, and strengthen all the time. But number 1 for us was, how do we support our people? And along with that goes the economic responsibility as well. One of the things we did very early on was we offered a 10% kind of special payment to all of our frontline associates to make sure that they were able to make it through these difficult circumstances. We've got to face it. I mean, they're really the ones that are keeping this business moving, and we owe them a massive debt of gratitude right now. Second focus was, how do we serve our customers? As an essential service, we believe very much that serving our customers, making sure that we had the product they were looking for, making sure that they had a safe environment to come and shop in, was the second most important priority. And so along with that, we focused very much at the first part of the lockdown on, again, how do we create that safe environment? How do we make sure that we don't run out of basics? And how do we make sure that our customers are comfortable shopping with us? And the dynamics of that have changed a little bit over the last month, and we're learning a lot from it. The third priority for us, as we've gone through the lockdown, is how do we help communities? Like you, what we've seen is that as this lockdown has progressed, What's concerning for our markets here in Africa, and South Africa in particular, is it's creating a lot of stress and strain, and particularly in terms of hunger. That's become a big issue for us, is looking at how we can help in food insecurity. We've started off with a process of donating from the company early on that expanded into directing all of the donations that came from the executive committee of the business, as well as the board, toward that focus as well. I think at this stage in the game, we're well in excess of donating over 500 tons of food to communities, and we recognize that there's still so much more that we can do, and that we understand that this is going to be an ongoing issue. But helping communities, helping others has been a big topic of conversation in our business. Fourth priority was, how do we manage through the short-term issues that we've got? Like all businesses, we've had a substantial reduction in sales. We're not doing the same business that we should. We have suppliers that depend on us. We have employees that depend on us. So we quickly went into just how do we manage financially through the short-term dynamics of this. It's where every rand matters became really important. We needed to save costs. We needed to make sure that we were conserving cash. And so quickly shifted over to that focus of how do we manage financially in a responsible way through the lockdown. And I'm happy to say that I think our team has done a fantastic job. We've been able to create the headroom in order to sort of make it through this lockdown period and work well while we wait for things to open up. And we recognize, this is a pressure point for all businesses. Some businesses, like we've heard about with EdCon today, have not been as fortunate. And one of the fears that I do have is if that we don't see an opening soon, we'll see more businesses that will suffer that same fate. And it's just the reality of where we're at. The final priority, number 5 for us, is how do we drive our fundamental strategy forward? And I've already covered that with you, but while we've been in lockdown, we've continued to work. So we've continued to host very focused discussions with our people internally. We've been working with vendors, continuing to advance all of the various points of the strategic agenda and not lose focus. What we do in Massmart is we have 1 week a month that we call Meeting Week, so that we can really focus all of our leadership on the biggest issues in the business. And we had our Meeting Week last week, and we spent a full day just talking about Smart Spend. How do we really focus our business on saving money? We had another day where we focused on all of our other strategic projects and got status updates and talked about next steps. But one of the things I'm learning from the lockdown is I'm trying to manage very much the same schedule that I would in normal business. I don't want to let up. I'm afraid of that if we do, that we'll start to lose our way. So we've got to keep the pressure on. Toward that end, I meet with my executive committee every day and have a touch base with them so that we talk about all of the issues. And I think our biggest struggle as an executive committee is how do we move away from the day-to-day issues that we have and begin to focus on the medium term and the long term. And Meeting Week is one of the ways that we do that. It helps us to take time out to very intentionally focus on strategy. So let me wrap up maybe and just talk a little bit about moving forward, what we're seeing, what are the dynamic changes that are happening in our business that I know are going to impact us going forward. And I guess it's obvious, but number one is we're preparing ourselves for the reality that safeguarding people, our associates, our customers, is just going to become the new normal. And we're going to be working that way for many, many months and perhaps years to come. And so we're really trying to zero in on how we do the best job with that. I view that as a threshold issue. If we don't do that well, we won't have a license to operate. And I think it's critical that be the number one focus. We know that we're moving into an economic trough, unfortunately, and we're trying to anticipate it in the best way that we can. But everything that we're seeing financially is suggesting that it's going to be a difficult time, and it's going to take us some time to come out of that. What I always try to do is to not allow the economic environment I'm in to dictate my strategy. It informs my strategy, but it doesn't dictate my strategy. So it gives us context. We know what we have to do. We understand that customers are going to be disrupted. Customers are going to be looking for value. They're going to need help. And one of the key things that we can do is to help provide that during this time. We know there's going to be financial insecurity. We're seeing customers move toward value even more strongly than ever before. And of course, we see them moving aggressively toward online. And our online business is growing now by leaps and bounds. In fact, triple-digit growth over last year. And in fact, what we're quickly trying to do is innovate around how we better serve our customers in that regard. And today, actually, we just launched a test with Uber to deliver out of game stores to our customers. And we'll quickly stand that test up and grow it over the next couple of weeks. But it's really a reflection of serving what is tremendous customer demand in online. We've always talked about the fact that we're going to reach a point where there is going to be a point of inflection on online. And I think that this may be the event that triggers that. And we're seeing that today. Just a couple of other points maybe to wrap up and what we're seeing and what we think we need to do. We're talking a lot about imported product and how we manage through that. And imported product is complicated because we are largely an import economy. And we're going to continue to import, but there are going to be certain items where we are probably going to need to start looking at supply more locally and how we help manufacturers begin to develop locally. So we're taking a hard look at our supplier development efforts. I think Massmart's done a wonderful job with that over the years, but we're going to need to step it up because we're going to need more sources of local supply. And I think it's also one of our ways of giving back to the economy. But it's also motivated for business reasons. We've got a rand that's depreciating. We've got sources of supply overseas that are obviously less certain now because of the changes that have happened with COVID, and we have to respond to that. Certainly, I've mentioned it before, we're seeing a change in the price-value relationship. We're seeing a shift, I think, in channels. Customers are moving to online. They're also moving more to convenience. And we're seeing it impact stores in different ways. And then fundamentally also, we're seeing a big shift in digital. And it's starting to get accepted and pulled into the business even more aggressively. And so digital tools of all kinds are becoming very important. In fact, one of the things that the executive committee was talking about today was how do you test effectively associates and maybe customers that are coming into the stores to see if they're early symptomatic of COVID. And we've got temperature thermometers that we're using, the heat thermometers. But we were talking about a new technology, well, not a new technology, but a digital technology to test oxygen levels as an early indicator of someone that perhaps is symptomatic, and beginning to think about how we might apply that technology in stores. I just give that example because I think it's going to be more common and more frequent that we see those types of changes in all respects in our lives, not just in retail, but more broadly. So I might pause there. I certainly want to move over to question and answers, but that hopefully gives you a little bit of a sense of what the journey is that we've taken so far, what the strategy is that we've focused on, and at least from a priority standpoint, how Massmart is thinking about the current context of where we're at today. So SA2, I might pause there and just open it up for any questions.
Hi, Mitch. Can you hear me?
I can, clearly.
Thank you so much for what was a very detailed, very insightful presentation, and with you sort of opening up about your business and all the strategic pillars and fundamentals that you've been focusing on since you arrived, and also thank you for I think just sharing with us that as a chief executive, whilst you have to deal with COVID, but you need not lose sight of what your biggest strategy is and what kind of strategic pillars you were trying to put in place prior to the crisis arriving. I also think what's good for me, who's a transformation agent and who's very passionate about ensuring that people, employees and communities are assisted and are not forgotten as we try and maximize profit in our business. I think when you mentioned your 5 priorities that you focused on during COVID, there was a very strong sense of how you're looking after your associates, how you're ensuring that the communities in which you operate, and I guess and beyond, are also looked after from executive level right through the business and up to the board. So thank you very, very, very much. I've learned a lot. I've taken pages of notes. And I think I've got a couple of questions, but I think I'll start with the questions that have been asked whilst you've been presenting, and then I'll just give you an opportunity to respond, Mitch. So from Zinzi Golodela, she asks, what of the business is a commitment to South Africa, and how do you see commercial value add back in?
So what is the commitment to South Africa?
Yes, and how do you see commercial value add back in?
So fundamentally, we are a South African company. Even though we are part of Walmart, we don't exist without having incredibly strong ties back into South Africa. And South Africa's success is critical to our success. So how do we think about that? One of the things I mentioned while I was speaking was our supplier development fund as a way that we can give back to South Africa. I mean, certainly we can engage in philanthropic efforts. We can donate. We can enhance educational programs. All of those types of things. They're all incredibly important. One of the things we're trying to do as well, though, is we believe that in order to create lasting economic benefit in South Africa, we have to develop manufacturing and suppliers here that are local, that can feed back into our business. One of the things that we've done over the last several years is to slowly but surely build that program up to where it's become fairly significant for us. And in fact, as I reflect back on Black Friday of this last year, the number one unit item that we sold during Black Friday was developed by one of our supplier development companies, where we had helped fund, create specs for the item, committed to offtake, etc. And it's a good deal for us because we get a great product that's at a great price, and it's a great deal for the manufacturer because they're able to build a company build a company. It's local. It creates employment, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. And while we're in this COVID-19 crisis together, one of the big concerns that we have is keeping those supplier development companies afloat, because all of the same issues that I spoke about earlier with us and managing through our liquidity and cash flow, et cetera, exists with all companies right now, and those supplier development companies in particular. So we pay a lot of attention to it. It's a way that we, I think, give back in a sustainable business way as well. And that's both how we give and how the business benefits. I think our opportunity now is to take that program to the next level, or 10x that level, because we fundamentally have products that we're importing today that I know that we could substitute with a local manufactured item if we can find the right manufacturer, if we can work on specs with them, and if we can continue to build it out. And I think we can grow that program into something more substantial.
Thanks very much, Mitch, for that. And I think just building on that question, I wouldn't be a BMF board member and a transformation agent if I didn't ask you, from the time you arrived, what have you observed about transformation within Massmart, both at a board level, at an exco level, and at a senior and middle management level? What efforts are being put in place to make sure that we see representativity in both women and in previously disadvantaged groups at all levels of the Massmart group? And hopefully that has not taken a back seat during COVID, because unfortunately we have seen instances where we've heard snippets of different industries where transformation has been, in times of crisis, we don't have time for transformation. And so I just would like your views on that as well.
So, transformation has been an interesting topic for me as I've come in, because I must say that what I've learned while I've been here is you do have to do a bit of deep dive education on South Africa. And I understood South Africa maybe from a distance, but having an opportunity to talk with people, talk with leaders, and I think even meet with the executive committee of Black Management Forum is instructive as well for me in my learning process. But the bottom line is we must continue to transform as a business, and it's an important part of our success and the future of where we're going. And fundamentally for me, diversity is a critical part of business success. Why is it important? It's critical because the customers that we serve are representative of the population of the country, and so we've got to do it. From an executive committee perspective, let me start there. I think that at this stage in the game, we have done reasonably well on the gender side. But we've got work to do in terms of transformation. And so as I look at recruitment for new executive committee roles, it weighs heavily on me in making the right types of decisions. I think we have a board that is very diverse and I think strongly representative of what best in class should be. And I appreciate their guidance, and they hold me to an incredibly high standard. I get reminded all the time that I need to do more. So that's very helpful. But I think about transformation in our business. What I'm concerned about, and I think what we have to be careful of, is I think that we're going to get to a good level. We're certainly at a good level at board. I think we're going to get to a good level at Exco. I'm concerned about the next layer down below Exco. I think that's really where we need to work. And as I think about transformation, it's not just making appointments or elevating associates into support roles, but we've got to put them into P&L business roles as well. And so I'm keen to find leaders that can lead businesses for us in the future, that are representative of the diversity of this country. And that's a big priority. And I certainly don't want my legacy to be that I didn't advance that agenda. The one other important thing that we've done recently is we've added our equity targets as an explicit component of our non-financial metrics for bonuses for our executive committee. And I think it's got to really start with them. They've got to help drive it, and we've got to drive it throughout the organization. But we're making changes. I think it's safe to say, like many companies, we're not where we want to be, but we're clear about what we have to do, and we've got to hold ourselves to a high standard. That's where we're at.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. So I'm straddling between program director and a consumer of most of your products. So some of my questions are very experiential. I wanted to ask you two things around the Dion Wyatt scenario. One is, what were the core issues with Dion Wyatt's value proposition that was just not working? And the second one is, as you then closed those Dion Wyatt scales, how have you found South Africa's labor relations environment? Because you obviously then had to deal with unions as you went through that process.
Thank you for the question. It's with Dion Wyatt, it was fairly clear fairly quickly. Like any CEO coming in, the first thing you do is begin looking at the financials of the business. And I could see that Dion Wyatt had been struggling and had been struggling for some time. As you toured the stores, as I toured the stores, what I saw was Dion Wyatt was very much focused on kind of a high-end niche customer. We're selling very, very expensive electronics and specialty goods. And what was happening in the business was that it was quickly getting disintermediated by online players. And I had the feeling, as I was touring Dion Wyatt stores, that maybe customers would come in for the demo of the product, and then they would reference the pricing online and go and find the lowest possible price they could for that item. And that's a tough environment to compete in. And it's happened globally. One of the areas that's been subject to the most disintermediation has really been that high-end electronics area. And we're also selling a lot of those same items, not all the same assortment, but many of those same items in our game stores and in our macro stores. And I also felt that a lot of that business would get transferred over in that way. So, yeah, as we looked at the business, we looked at the prospects for future growth. It became very clear that we weren't going to get that business to a spot that was going to work. And the hard decision there is you have to reach a conclusion that says, is it worth management time and effort to try to get it to the right spot, or should we focus on other things? And because Dion Wyatt was inside of the mass discounters business with game, the bigger priority for me was getting game right. And that's where we've decided to focus. Strategy, SA2 for me is about making choices. And some of those choices are hard ones to make. And certainly it always is hard when you have to make that type of decision. The second part of your question was about the labor environment in South Africa. And, I must admit it's probably one of the more challenging labor environments that I've seen anywhere in the world. But it's part of the landscape of South Africa, and it's the reality of the environment that we work in. So, rather than get frustrated by it, I think it's there for a reason. We respect it, we honor it, we work with our labor representatives and try to find the best possible answer. And that's sort of my philosophy. I've worked with labor unions in many countries, and I think, all human relationships kind of start with mutual respect, right? And so if I come in respectful of what they're trying to do and their agenda, and I try to understand it, and I hope for the same, hopefully we'll get to the right place.
Thanks. I think I would agree with you on that, on our labor relations environment being some of the most challenging, but I think you can understand from a historical context perspective why that is very necessary in a South African context, and you can also appreciate the people that it seeks to protect, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. I've got a question from Lusanda Ngoliwe. She's a BMF board member. It says, and I think you might have touched on it, Mitch, is Massmart SA considering ramping online sales in the time of COVID? And I think, if I could just add on to that, you said that people moved very much online. I think you mentioned that it started even before COVID, that you saw an increase in online sales. Mm-hmm. Do you think that your systems and your infrastructure and your delivery times and everything gives as good an experience as, say, your rivals like Takealot? Because ultimately, I think for the South African consumer, and I'm speaking as a South African consumer, what deters me really from buying online is if there's inconvenience and delays and a lot of administration around that whole process, then I'd rather just drive to a Makro or a Game store. So did you, in the process of seeing those online sales ramp up, were your systems already sort of ready, or have you made a lot of improvements to make the customer experience better?
Yeah. Let me address, first of all, just online sales. So what we're allowed under the current regulations to sell are just essential items. All of the non-essentials we can't sell. So even on the strength of just the essential items, the desire for customers not to have to leave their home has really caused our online sales to spike. And it's stressed our system for sure. There's no question. As it pertains to the online infrastructure, the IT piece of it, I'm not satisfied where we're at. We have work to do. There's no question. And ramping that capability up as fast as we can and getting better quickly is a big priority. And I think, SA2, you really nailed the fundamental point for online retail. It is all about customer metrics and satisfaction of the customer as a priority, and understanding very clearly what that looks like. So there should be a service level that you set, and then you've got to measure religiously how you perform against that service level. And I think, frankly speaking, Massmart had a lot of work to do to get to the right spot with that. The final part that I wanted to just address quickly, and the other phenomenon that we're seeing, is I also think it's the case with online that I don't believe that fundamentally customers are just going to completely shift to online. One of the things that we're seeing is that the idea that a customer would just stay in their home and order everything and have it delivered is not going to happen. People fundamentally want to get out, and we're learning that even if it's just that small social interaction at the cash register or with the greeter, the desire for human contact is great, especially nowadays. And I think the COVID crisis has helped us to learn that. But I think that the advantage we may have is that if we can build the right type of omni-channel presence where it's a combination of online, and that may be delivery, it may be pick up at a store, it may be pick up something, but then also do some shopping. I think there's going to be a variety of different approaches that are going to really resonate. But this need and desire for human contact, I think, is going to reinforce, in a way, physical retail, while at the same time potentially helping online to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I was laughing when you spoke about the need for physical contact. I must say, during the COVID-19, as the mother in the house, my favorite times has been when I've had to go out, when I've had to go out and buy groceries, because I get to see people. I get to stand in the queue at Macro and talk to the next person and complain about how long the queue is taking. But it's still interaction. And I've thoroughly enjoyed those trips to the grocery store. That's on the one side. Mitch, there's somebody who's going to come on the video, but just before he does, I want to ask you something as an avid Macro shopper. I've had a Macro card for years, and I still can't figure out what Macro has been doing with my information. I'm still really trying to figure out what value I've really gotten out of, except that I actually can't buy at Macro without my Macro card. Otherwise, my Macro card would mean very little to me. So maybe if you can give me some insights on that before my colleague comes onto the video.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, actually, it probably is helpful to you in maybe an invisible way, in the sense that it helps us, it really helps us analyze shopping behavior, habits, what customers are interested in, that type of thing. So it helps us to curate the assortment for the store and make it better. But I do think there's an opportunity to use that data, with your permission, of course, in respecting all of the privacy laws. But there's a way for us to use that data in a more intelligent manner to make the shopping experience better for you personally and for all of our customers, so that we interact with them. I think that's going to be the trend, is that customization of the shopping experience. And what it may come down to is that, you know, when you walk in the store, we know it's you. We know that you may be ready to buy something, and that we're able to offer you a focused coupon for that, or a discount to help you with that purchase decision. And that's the way we're beginning as Walmart to leverage that type of data globally. We just have a little bit of catching up to do here.
Great, thanks for that. Mfundo?
Thank you. Am I audible?
You are.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Mitch, thank you so much for that. And thank you, SA2. My question just goes back to the transformation journey that you spoke of, and more specifically around your value chains. And the reason for that is because within the BMF, I represent a group of people or entrepreneurs within the organization that struggle quite a bit in terms of working with entities like yourselves. And I mean, the retail sector is notorious for being the least transformed sector in our economy. And a lot of feedback around that is probably because, as we think about it amongst ourselves, that there isn't that great an incentive to transform, or it's because our laws just aren't that tight in terms of driving that transformation. But I mean, you spoke about the supplier development program. I haven't heard a lot about it since it was launched. Could be just my ignorance. I haven't heard a lot of its successes or its failures, for that matter. It's just been less quiet. But the area that really interests me is that the conversations at executive level seem to, at most cases, align with what we say as an organization like BMF. But at that level, what's that saying of rubber hits the road or tire hits the tar? Divisional level, that's where the wheels come off, because what is said at the top really doesn't translate at the bottom. I think probably because the interests there are probably not linked to the broader strategy. So I guess what I'm interested in, Mitch, is to what extent are we plugging in these black players that are struggling to list their products with your organizations? I know it's extremely hard for them to do that, but also to what extent are we changing the face of the value chain of that sort of business? And I say this because we've had these kind of discussions with many other companies, and really it does seem we speak the same language, but it just never takes off. So I guess my particular interest in this regard wouldn't just be a response or an account in terms of what is happening, but really to be able to connect with your organization so that we're able to bring tangible efforts to our members and say, these are the people that you can talk to. This is the program that's running. This is how we can work together and walk together in that aspect.
I think it's a great challenge. As you were speaking, one of the things that came to my mind, and one of the strategies that we've used in the past in other places that I've worked is we've hosted sort of a recurring process of supplier fairs where we bring together the suppliers that you would represent, or a broader group, along with our merchant teams from across the organization. And we set targets for effectively bringing that product into the stores and signing on suppliers. But I've seen it executed successfully. I think that there's no reason why we couldn't do it here. And maybe it's interventions like that. And I just throw it out as an idea or a suggestion, but I'm quite open to any idea a creative idea that might work better. That's just one way to do it. But I'm certain there are things that we can do that where we can best meet each other. I think it comes down to effort and will and desire and things like that. But look, I think it's a question of leadership commitment and desire and will, and you've got to push. And it's like any enterprise. At first, it takes a lot of effort, but once you kind of get it going, it starts to move very quickly. So I don't know if that resonates with you. Maybe that's a way for us to approach it.
I think he's come out of the room, Mitch, but I think Mfundo is the head of our SMME desk, and he's very, very passionate and committed. And I think now that we have this relationship with yourselves and with Massmart, I think perhaps we can then facilitate ongoing discussions and actual action points out of the session. He's just dropped off the room, but he is part of the board, and so I think we will be taking it forward offline. I'm sure he appreciates your response and your comments on the issue.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to meet and discuss it and hear ideas on the best way to approach it. And I think our company wants to be a leader in that regard, and it'll be a good opportunity as well for us to talk more about what we've done with the Supplier Development Fund. And maybe there are other suppliers out there that we would put into that same group as well. I think the one other interesting priority for us, what we're really trying to drive, is we're also looking for suppliers that we can leverage as export suppliers as well to help other Walmart markets that need product, but also to help align and drive the President Ramaphosa's focus on export and things like that. One of the things we did this last fall was we invited buyers from the US, Mexico, Japan, China to come to South Africa. and we've been steadily signing up suppliers of different products for export as well. And obviously that takes on a whole nother significance because volumes can get large. But that's another potential topic of conversation as well.
Thank you very much. I think, can I read maybe 3 questions before I allow some colleagues into the room? The questions are coming thick and fast, which I hope you can keep up. The first one is from Jan Muganwa. In these tough times, is Massmart thinking meaningfully about social impact, especially saving jobs? Unfortunately, this is often interpreted as asking businesses to run at a loss, which is not the case. There may be other cost lines that can be prioritized before layoffs. For example, executive incentives, rental negotiations, lower costs through leveraging group buying power. Examples are many. As leaders, we need to often find the responsible thing to do is often not in the same axis as the optimal option. So can you just pop that one, Mitch? And I'll give you 3, and then you can respond. Lili Moabi, my colleague also on the board, says, any mergers and acquisitions done during this year, and how did that change the strategy of the organization? The third one says, I am a fan of game and macro.
I'm sorry, SA2, can you repeat number 2?
Can you hear me?
Can you repeat the second?
Any mergers and acquisitions done during the year?
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Any mergers and acquisitions done during the year, and how did that change the strategy of the organization?
Okay.
That's number 2. Number 3, I am a fan of game and macro. That's where I do my groceries. Will the price of products increase while moving to electronic sales such as online? In addition, transportation costs of such products, will it be paid by the end users? So I think let's just take those 3 for now, and then we will, I think there's 1 or 2 of the colleagues who will then enter the room. Okay,
sounds good. So let's start with the first one on cost and how we think about it. So the most significant cost reduction program that we have in the business doesn't touch people at all. I referenced the Smart Spend project that we're working on, and maybe I'll give you just a little bit of color around that. But what we do with Smart Spend, it's a very structured program, but we look at every line of the P&L, not employment costs, but every other line, and we basically assign a leader to that line item. And they're usually someone that reports to an executive committee member. They then work with a small team that they formulate to begin to develop strategies on how to reduce that line item. As you rightfully point out in your question, one of the big areas of opportunity is rent. And so that's one of our packages is rental cost. And in fact, we have an executive sponsor for each one of those lines in the P&L, and I'm the executive sponsor for the rent line. We are aggressively going back right now and renegotiating rent with all of our landlords. And in fact, through the month of February primarily, I sat down and met with most of the big landlords that represent the vast majority of our property that we have, and working with them to try to get rent set at an appropriate level. I give that as an example, but we look at everything. We look at utilities. We look at and how we can better get to better costs there, how we look at alternative technologies, how we reduce our costs or reduce our usage. All of those things we've got on the table. As I've mentioned before, we see about R1.5 billion in savings if we drive these programs fully. When I was in Japan, I ran this same program, and we wound up saving to the tune of about 12% of our total identified cost. And I expect it's going to be higher here in Africa, simply because Massmart has not fully leveraged in its history the power of collaborating across the total business. And so we're finding a lot of opportunity for saving there. I agree fundamentally with the point that you're making, though, and I think most CEOs think this as well. It's painful to go through a reduction in force, and it's not something that anybody relishes doing. And oftentimes the biggest cost savings are in other buckets, and that's certainly what we're attacking right now. So it's a point well taken, and that's the way we're approaching it. The second question was around M&A. So Massmart itself hasn't really done any significant M&A to speak of. I know that there may be some out there. I actually think it really hasn't been that impactful thus far. I think it's going to potentially become impactful coming out of this COVID situation, because I think there will be an opportunity for acquisitions of companies that have become distressed, for partnerships even. Doesn't always have to be an M&A, but for partnerships, for other ways of companies to work together in order to maximize shareholder value. But I do expect that we'll see, as things settle down, as the economy settles, companies will start looking for value if they have available cash flow to invest. The third is on online and pricing and differentials. So what we try to do is to manage as closely as possible the pricing that we have in the store with the pricing that's outside of the store online. Online tends to be a little bit more dynamic, however, given all of the things that are happening in the online space. And it's a very competitive space as well. So online pricing, depending on the day, depending on the item, can be better. Not always, but can be. The hardest part for any retailer of making online work is what we call last mile. The delivery cost from either the distribution center or the store to the customer. It's the most expensive component, oftentimes, of the whole transaction. So what we'll try to do is to manage that cost as low as we possibly can, and we constantly work on that to do it. Some of that cost we do share with the customer as well, and ask them to cover, because we view it as a service that we provide in terms of getting that product ultimately to you. Obviously, it's a very competitive space, though, and every retailer is going to manage it slightly differently. But we're all looking at each other's costs, and we're trying to maintain a competitive profile. And that's probably the best news for customers, is that when retailers compete, customers win, and you get the best price possible.
Thank you very much. I think our members will be very satisfied with those answers. I mean, there was a question just around looking at South Africa and data costs and how that will translate onto online sales. But if we can just park that for now, Mitch. Sung Yoon, the CEO of Samsung South Africa, is asking, please share your thoughts regarding improvement of supply chain integrations, Massmart internally and together with outside vendors.
Whoa. So thanks for the question, Sung. It's good to at least connect with you in this way. The opportunities are massive, I think. Massmart has an opportunity, I think, internally to do a much better job with how we manage supply chain. And I think we have an opportunity to work with our suppliers to reduce supply chain costs overall. And I think that's probably where we're going to wind up working with you as we continue to integrate our own supply chain, have more focused points of delivery into a single distribution center, as we work to place orders that span across formats that are more clear, as opposed to working individually on many different orders and things like that. And I think also the other opportunity that we have is, how do we better work together on demand planning and making sure that we are getting inventory just in time into the stores as much as we possibly can, but also giving you forward visibility on what kind of supply we see, what peaks we have, all of those types of things. So it's almost the case for me that there are so many ways for us to work together that I think are value enhancing for both parties. I'm excited about that opportunity. I appreciate your partnership, by the way, Sung. So thank you very much.
And thank you both for being corporate members of the BMF, and we hope to continue engaging and sharing the way we have tonight. Tonight has been really, really awesome. Before I welcome on my Deputy President, Mitch, there's just a comment and an appreciation from Zinzin Golodela. Thank you, Mitch. I learned more about leadership in this webinar. Simple yet firm strategy, open to learn and clear about principles that drive your vision. So thanks for that. I think the Deputy President of the BMF, are you coming into the room?
I believe the Deputy President has been disconnected.
Okay, I guess it's back to me then. Let me just see, she did post some questions, perhaps that can assist. What is percentage import by local spend? I guess maybe that is the contrast between what is your percentage that you import versus what you spend locally, and that is from the Deputy President, so I'm not sure if that's what she was going to say when she entered the room, but it is one of her questions, just as we draw to a close, Mitch.
Yeah, it depends on area, and it's hard in our business because I don't know that we've ever done a tally across the total of the business, but on the food side, we're almost 100% local. As you can imagine, we have a few imported products. On the general merchandise side, we heavily skew in the other direction, and so we import a lot of product there. Probably to the tune of again, depends on category. We have some areas where we do have a lot of local production too, like in clothing, textiles, things like that. So I would say maybe on average on general merchandise in some categories, we're up to 80 and 90%. So that's the opportunity, I think, is what portions of those are potential for import in the future as well.
Thank you very much. I think I will draw us to a close in the absence of any further questions. Yes, I see the DP has left the room again, so I don't think she's having good connectivity issues today. So Mitch, just on behalf of the BMF, I really want to extend a word of gratitude for what has been really a masterclass in strategy, as well as a masterclass in retail. Most of us are not retailers, but I think the way that you have outlined your strategy, and also both outside of COVID and within COVID, has given us really an insight into how the CEO of a multinational retailer thinks and how they go about really turning around this massive ship. I'm happy to see that as American as you are, I guess you're a bit of a nomad because you've been in all these countries, and it seems like you've adapted well to the South African landscape, and you've taken the time to really understand the nuances and the dynamics of the South African retail landscape. And I think we really wish you really well as we go into stage 4 on Friday. I'm sure that some of the things that keep you up at night is really keeping your staff or your associates safe and keeping employees safe as well. I mean, that's going to be, even as we heard today that the Department of Basic Education outlined the return of kids to school. That is front of mind for absolutely everybody, and I think we really would like to wish you the best. I think you've done a fantastic job during the lockdown, and we hope that as the lockdown phases out, you will continue to be able to trade, resume most of your product lines while still keeping employees and customers safe. I just got a notification that the president of the BMF has joined the room. I'd hate to close before he has a few words. Andile, are you on? Andile? 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 I hear something, but I'm not quite sure if I hear his voice.
Andile, I hope you're doing well. I'd love to hear from you, but yeah, I look forward to meeting you either virtually or in person here very soon. But I really appreciate the opportunity. I've spoken with the group, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Okay, I'm not getting any other notifications. So I think, Mitch, thank you very much. We had a previous engagement session just to prepare for the session, and I really want to thank you for your time. I can imagine how most people are saying they're working harder from home than they do when it's open. So as the BMF, we really appreciate your support. We appreciate the partnership with Massmart. Mr. Sang Yung, I'm not sure if you're still online. We appreciate you taking part this evening and the partnership that BMF has also built with Samsung. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Standard Bank, and all the participants of this evening's session. You will get an email to notify you when the replay of the session is available. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to the Black Management Forum's YouTube page. With that, my name is Esitu Mangoja. It's been an absolute pleasure being your host tonight. Have a pleasant evening. Mitch, thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.